Today we have gathered to remember and celebrate the life of Tom Bollin. My name is Reverend Anthony McCarr, and I welcome you to this home for the human spirit, the Unitarian Universalist Church here at West Shore. We are remembering Tom today, and we are grieving his dying. And as we share our thoughts and stories about him, we may occasionally feel like crying, and that is fine. We know the pain that comes with tenderness. There is great grief in losing someone whose life we hold so dearly. But there may also be laughter at a funny story or two, and that also is fine in this space that is safe for all of our emotions, whatever comes up for us. In a time like this, joy and woe are indeed woven finely. But love is large enough for it all. Love lifts up all things. It hopes for all things. It endures all things. Love never ends. Said Unitarian minister A. Powell Davies, "When sorrow comes, let us accept it simply as a part of life. Let the heart be open to pain. All the evidence we have says that it is the better way." And so it is. Our tears will help us begin to learn to live with Tom's death. And we do this not as a matter of ending our relationship with him, but as a matter of beginning a new way of appreciating his life and all it has meant and will continue to mean to us. To honor the life and living of Tom Bollin, our chalice today will be lit by his grandson, Cameron. Let us now take a moment of silence to honor all loved ones who could only be here today in spirit. Amen. Emily Bollin offers us a reading now.
I'm going to read The Splendid Torch by George Bernard Shaw. And I think that this piece really shows about how my grandpa tried to live, as well as how he would encourage others to live. The Splendid Torch. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle for me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I have hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. Thank you.
Should have planned this better. It's hard enough getting up here. It's not a thing following your daughter. You can't sum up someone's life, let alone your father's, in just a few minutes. Can't be done. Lives take a lifetime, and I'm not going to try, but instead, I'd like to tell you some stories about the force of nature that was my dad. Tom Bollin was a Toledo boy through and through, always working, a very hard worker. He started off working for the library. He was a delivery boy. He always had a job. He was always doing something. He started throughout my childhood. He started early, he worked late, and in the evening he'd take on other challenges. As a kid in Toledo, he went to and worked at Camp Miaconda, which was a scouting camp there. He went to and eventually worked at the University of Toledo, where he studied English and theater and taught theater and directed. He spent the formative years of his professional career in Toledo, in education. He was part of an iconic summer concert series in Toledo, the Music Under the Stars, which is a concert series that occurs every Sunday throughout the summer at this beautiful amphitheater at the Toledo Zoo. He was the MC and would not just introduce things, but do the research and educate folks a little bit before each piece to tell you what the composer was doing in his life or at that particular moment. He loved all these things. He was a Toledo boy through and through, but he always took every opportunity to expand his horizons. Even early on in scouting, he went out and worked at Philmont in New Mexico. He loved to travel, and he showed he had a very purposeful attempt to expand his world through travel. He told me when I went off to NYU once upon a time that it had been a dream of his to also go off to the big city for school, to go to NYU, but just hadn't been available to him. And he was absolutely thrilled to watch me and then his grandson get to go do what he had always wanted to do. My dad was bright and insightful. He was a phenomenal problem solver. He was willing to try new things. For him, what was important was taking care of the kids. Would it be good for students? He would try new things with curriculum. He told me once that every year that he would suggest finding a way to upend the school day so that elementary kids could start early when they were awake and high school kids could sleep in. He could never sell that, but he wanted to do it. He was enthusiastic about so many things, but he was also a discerning audience. He would see any play, he would go to any orchestra or ballet or jazz clubs or try anything new and interesting. If he liked something, you'd hear about it. You'd hear about it. He was passionate and loud about the things he loved. If he didn't like it, you'd hear that too. Though not usually quite as loudly, or at least not as long. He liked to focus on the good stuff. He was one of those guys who, Anthony, took notes in the margins of his program at church. He would grade the sermons, I'm not going to lie. But he also took things from them. He would write down passages. He would circle the names of authors or philosophers or theologians. Those things he found meaningful and thought-provoking, he made note of, and he was excited by them. He would talk to the ministers after service about the insight that he had gained. He actually would, as a child, I remember he had a collection of sermons that he had brought home from church that had been meaningful to him, because he was always on the lookout for new ideas. He was clever and funny, loud, smiled a lot. He always had this sparkle in his eyes. You might use the word mischievous. He laughed often and loved laughing with his friends. I remember a story I was reminded of just the other day that he had told me about when my parents were living in the Old West End in Toledo, and they had a convertible VW Bug, and he would come out in the morning and find that someone had moved it. He had friends who would move his car because you could do that with a VW Bug, and it was funny. I think he was a little annoyed by it, but I think he was also much more impressed than annoyed, and he told me the story with a smile. My dad took charge at work, in his community, at times in conversation over dinner. He took charge, and he got people to follow him. His career in education, he tried everything. He was a teacher, a director, a vice principal, a principal, superintendent. All of these things had leadership in common. They had drive and ambition, and also a desire to make things better in a new way. He had a moral compass about what's wrong and right, and he lived by it. And while he had a lot of tact, and could be very convincing and tactful, he also had what we sometimes call the Bollin bluntness, speaking a truth plainly, sometimes a little too abruptly, but when you heard it, you knew it was also truth. My dad loved to buy gadgets and things that made him smile, and Costco, and gadgets and things that made him smile from Costco. My dad would show up at our door with a watermelon because they were having a sale, and we might want one too. He'd show up with a giant can of nuts. He'd show up with a bottle of instant margaritas or sangria, because, you know, it says Kirkland, but it's really pretty good. You're going to like it. We may have some in our basement still. I'm going to tell you a quick story about my son. A couple of years ago, came home from school, and he had bought this bucket hat with a smiley face on the front. And it's a goofy hat, right? And he knew it was a goofy hat, but it was fun. And it was actually the kind of thing that my dad may have bought himself on a whim, because if he saw something like that he wanted, he would just buy it and then probably give it to us after, you know, he got tired with it. But and it's also something, by the way, my grandpa might have bought. My grandpa was the first one to get those hats that had an umbrella on top. Can you picture those? He was convinced that they were going to be really useful. So Kenny comes home, and he's got the smiley face bucket hat. And he saw my dad and lovingly put it on my dad's head. And my dad said, "Oh, thank you." And he wore it for a little while. And at the end of the meal, my son said, "Okay, you know, are you going to give me my hat back?" And he's like, "No, it's mine now." And Kenny said, "Okay, all right." It was an accidental gift, but one he was glad to give. And so, anyway, over the next couple of years, my dad, we'd go over to pick him up over at Rocky River Village. We'd take him out to dinner, and he'd be wearing that hat. And that hat just kept coming up and coming up. It was the sort of thing, again, that my son got, but my dad, his whimsical nature, just, it fit. More than anything else, my dad was a positive, optimistic force. He was so optimistic about so much. When we were kids, we were never worried. Though looking back, there were at least a couple of times we probably should have been a little worried, and we just didn't know, right? I remember there was the teacher strike in Toledo. They were out for a little bit. They weren't getting paid. And my dad and Dick Huffman started working, delivering flowers for Patty's Flower Shop in Perrysburg, Ohio. And I just thought, oh, that's the kind of thing you do when you're on strike. And they did that for a while, actually. But I know they were doing it now to make ends meet because they weren't getting paid during a strike. At the time, I just thought it was this fun thing. And my dad enjoyed it. He had a ball. The blizzard of 1978, you know, we got locked in. We had a drift over our garage door that was 12 feet high. We weren't going anywhere. And after a few days, they'd been on the phone, and they called up, and I think we had a plan. And my dad put us on a sled, my sister and I, and it dragged us a mile to the Thayer's house, and they were near a main road. And we piled into the car and we went and stood at the grocery store with half of our town waiting for the milk truck to arrive and the bread truck to arrive. And it was an adventure. And that's all it was. It was a ball. We got to go to the grocery store in the middle of a blizzard on a sled. I mean, this is as good as it gets. I'm sure my parents were a little worried at that point. We were not. My dad was always optimistic. He was always positive, and we didn't know that there was anything to worry about. My dad loved good food. I remember him making sausage in the kitchen when I was little. That didn't continue too far, and tell you the truth, he wasn't much of a cook, but he loved a meal well done. His mom was a great cook. My mom was a great cook, and still is. And he really enjoyed good food. One of his favorite things in the world was to gather with a group of friends and linger over a great meal. He's someone who would engage servers and strangers and get everyone involved in the fun. My dad explored. He loved travel with family. He had no discernible language skills, as you may have read in his obit, but with smile and a twinkle in his eye, he would get the message across and we would be treated well. I remember when I was 12, we were in Innsbruck. We had been on the road in Europe for 10 days. My parents, educators, would save up so we could go experience Europe. And we're just traveling around, and we ended up in Innsbruck, and we're all exhausted and tired. And he said, okay, we're going to stay here for a few days. And it's still one of those, magical moments in your memory. I remember we met a friend at that point, and my dad was talking to him. Was he from the Netherlands? Denmark. And my dad decided to try humor on someone from another culture. But he said, what do you call a person who speaks 3 languages? And this young man could actually, in English, say trilingual. And he said, that's right. What do you call someone who speaks 2 languages, like bilingual? And my dad said, what do you call someone who speaks 1 language? And he looked at my dad's stumps and he said, an American. So he knew his shortcomings, but he embraced them, and it never slowed us down. In his retirement years, he traveled more than anybody I know, Europe, Asia. Some years it seemed like he was abroad as much as he was at home. And he loved it when our kids traveled abroad, hearing about trips to Greece and Italy and Finland and a weekend trip to Munich. He knew the kids were having fun and learning as much there as they were in school. My dad loved his family and friends. My childhood memories are filled with falling asleep on a Saturday night while the adults laughed and watched Saturday Night Live. There's usually with the Huffmans, and us 4 kids would just be all slumbered up together in a ball. He loved to travel with friends or travel to go see friends. He loved grabbing a friend for a Friday night drive with the top down. Growing up, every night we sat down to dinner as a family and talked about our days. And without knowing it, Buffy and I were learning from both of our parents how to be good people and deal with problems and treat others right. He was there for us. He would go to see Buffy and the band win the halftime at football games on Friday nights. He'd come to my soccer games, which he did not understand. He and my mom would come to my track meets, which, if you're a parent who's been to track meets, you understand that's a labor of love. Your kid's running for like a minute. And it's usually, of course, Northeast Ohio, snow and rain. He took me to watch Michigan home games. We're in Toledo, so for the Ohio State fans, you have to forgive us, but in Toledo, you can be either. And we'd go up to the big house every Saturday in the fall for 5 years and watch Michigan games. And people thought of him as a big Michigan fan. I realized that he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the team. He supported the team, but he was there because he wanted to take his son to Michigan games. He didn't understand sports ball. Never did. I remember trying to play catch with him in the front yard as a kid. I was a better thrower than him after about 10 minutes. But you know what? He was out there doing it. And it wasn't until years later that I figured out that he really didn't know what he was doing. So, good at faking it. I remember our trips to NYU. He would drive me to college, and it would take like 8.5, 9 hours from Perrysburg. And we would talk about the whole world. We'd talk about everything. And he lived for those moments, and I kind of knew it at the time, and I appreciated it. And we would talk politics and social things and current events and whatever was happening. And they were just these long, deep conversations. And I appreciated them at the time. And now that I'm grown and have kids of my own, I appreciate them even more. Those times are magic. And he could be so caring. His dear cousin, Kathy Brunt's here with us today from Michigan, like a sister to him growing up, like a sister to him throughout his life. Kathy told me fairly recently about a time as a child when she was stuck in the hospital for a while, and he came to see her every day because that's what you do, and that's who he was, and that's what he did. My sister and I heard recently from a person we don't know who reached out to us and said, "Your dad was there for me. I was in a tough time in my life. I was turning toward drugs. I was turning toward things that were bad for me. And he helped me see the value in my own life and explained to me that I was important. And he really saved my life." He cared. Dad is gone now, but Dad lives on. He lives on in the lives of those he touched. When I find myself exploring, when I see my kids exploring, taking big steps, taking chances, going off to school, going abroad, having the strength. Having the strength to be themselves. I see reflections of my father. When I see my sister's self-discipline, her problem-solving, her organization, her modesty and good humor, I see my dad. When I see my son absolutely driven toward a goal, whether it's becoming a great chess player or exercising or launching into a new career now, I see reflections of my dad. When I see my daughter's insightfulness and brilliance, her passion for the arts and the things and people she cares about, I see my dad. When I see my nephew Cameron's inquisitive, questioning nature, his love of food, I see my dad. When I see our kids' deep-seated and visceral reaction to injustice and unfairness, I see him. When I see our kids' enthusiasm for the things they care about, I see him. When I see our children's kindness, silliness, sense of humor, when I hear their laughter, I hear my dad. My dad passed away at 12:43 a.m. last Saturday. Everyone had said their goodbyes, and Kenny and I stuck around to be with him for at least a little while longer. At 12:30, his breathing changed. Kenny and I exchanged a look. We knew it was the end. Lying next to him, I had my hand on my dad's right shoulder. Kenny took his left hand. We told him we were there for him. We both knew when he took his last breath, and we both broke down for a bit after that. And a bit later, as we left, Kenny grabbed that silly bucket hat. And he looked at me as if to ask if that were all right. And I told him it was perfect. And it is. It's Kenny's hat again now. And my dad lives on.
Let's now all rise in body or in spirit and sing our hymn, number 318, We Would Be One. Thank you, Kip, for your heartfelt remembrances of your dad. Thank you. And now we open up the mic to those who might have something briefer to share. Please come forward and share at this podium.
My grandpa was always a large part of my life. I know earlier on when I was little, he spent a lot of time in Minnesota and traveling and doing the things that you do in your retirement to go enjoy the world. But he would always make time to come back and visit us, and multiple times a year he'd stop in and stay over at our house and give us memorable gifts and make us feel loved as we were little. And those gifts, as my dad said, continued on as we got older, whether they took the form of checks or play trains or watermelons. But he was always a big part of our lives. And as we grew older into middle school and high school, he would take us to school every day and drop us off and back home when my parents couldn't, and be at all of our choir concerts and track meets and any other event he could support. He one time even asked me how I was doing during the middle of the last 100 meters of my race. Yeah. I didn't answer him at the time, but I made sure to tell him I appreciated it after. My grandpa watched over me when my parents went out of town and we needed someone there. I got to use his car occasionally to drive around in high school when there were no other options available, and we went to many family dinners with him throughout my entire childhood and into my young adulthood. And I know that he has passed now, but I love him, and I love that he remembered that gift from me and took that with him everywhere. And I'm glad that I was able to give that to him, and I'm glad that he was such an amazing and wonderful part of my life. Thank you.
Wow, following the entire Bollin family is a tough act. Hello, I'm Robin, lover of all things Bollin. When I moved here from Cincinnati almost 20 years ago, it wasn't long before I met Kip and Kathy, who are my very best friends. After being fortunate enough to be included in many family gatherings, I got to know Tom. I remember first meeting him from across the table in Kip and Kathy's backyard. That was the first time I saw the twinkle in his eyes. He was ridiculously intelligent, terribly funny, and immediately made me feel right at home. We traded quips, and I was smitten from that moment on. As the years passed, sometimes Tom would need some assistance, like being driven to a doctor's appointment, or being a friendly face for a visit on the rare occasion that one of the family wasn't available. I was the obvious choice, as I'm the only jobless person in our friendship group. I'm grateful for those times and the twinkle that was always in his eyes that I will miss so much. Luckily, that twinkle is also in Kip's eyes, as I see so much of his dad in him. Thank you, Bollins, for allowing me to be part of your amazing family.
Strange Meadowlark by Dave Brubeck. Seasons of Love is a song from the 1996 Broadway musical Rent, and I am told that Tom loved that song. He loved that song. It starts, 525,600 minutes. Are you singing along with me? Right? Can you hear that? 525,000 moments so dear. You can join me. 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year? Okay, it's your turn. In daylights, right? In sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches, in miles, in laughter and strife. In 525,600 minutes, how do you measure a year in the life? And then comes the answer. How about love? Over and over again, the same answer. How about love? How about love? Measure in love. Seasons of love. Seasons of love. And that's what we're doing right now. Measuring in love, celebrating in love the life of Tom Bollin, that force of nature. All of 82 years long, full of aliveness, even in his last years when struggling with Parkinson's. Right now, we are feeling all the joy and all the sorrow. It is all mixed up together. Thank you for all of the remembrances that you have shared about Tom. I never had the fortune of meeting him personally, so I am grateful to be getting to know him through your stories and your laughter and your tears. And I would add just a few things more. We've already heard a little bit about Tom in his educational career, how he held nearly every position available to an educator in that 35-plus year-long career. Teacher and theater director, vice principal, principal, executive director, assistant, superintendent, president of the Toledo Education Association. But listen to what Bob Noyed has to say about the certain quality of leadership Tom brought to all of these positions. Bob says, "What a wonderful man, a friend, colleague, and advisor. I met Tom when he came to Robbinsdale area schools to serve as superintendent. I was the director of communications for the district, and we clicked almost instantly. Tom's time in Robbinsdale was the best part of my career. Never a dull moment. We were always thinking about what else we could do. For the rest of my career, I searched for another Tom Bollin. And while I found pieces and parts in other leaders, I never found the total package. He led with passion and compassion, unafraid to make the hard decisions or take on difficult issues. And of course, one of the best parts of knowing Tom is having the opportunity to dine with him. He was delighted to visit high-end, fine dining restaurants, but also loved grabbing a chili dog at the local drive-in. He brought joy to everything he did. He truly made a difference for me, and I will miss him greatly." That's what Bob Noyed says. And for me, the main takeaway is that Tom was a man of integrity. His outward leadership was consistent with his inner spirit, which was passionate, compassionate, courageous, and joyful. And such stories don't just come from Tom's colleagues and peers. I want you to listen to this story from Emily Menson, who speaks of an encounter with Tom when she was celebrating her 6th birthday. She says, "My dad worked for Tom in Robbinsdale, and I remember for my 6th birthday, which was my golden birthday," she says, "I walked into his big office, and he sat at his big desk. And I ran up and I sat on his lap, and he gave me a set of Pocahontas pencils. I got to ride in a parade with him in his convertible, and other countless memories I have. He gave the best hugs and always made you feel so special." Tom was passionate, compassionate, courageous, joyful, and also kind to a 6-year-old on her birthday. And add to this appreciation of beauty, willing to press pause on the rush and gush of life just to stand there and to take in the glory of natural beauty. Rob Kvilhaug speaks to this. One night, after sharing a meal together and returning home, they noticed quote, "a beautiful, gentle snowfall coming down. So instead of just taking the quick, usual route home," says Rob, "we took the chain of lakes way home, going past Lake Calhoun, now called Bde-Maka-Ska, which is the original Native American name for the lake. So as we were winding through the streets, almost no one was traveling with us. But we were mesmerized by the awesome beauty and the gentle light, the gentle night. We stopped the car, got out, started taking pictures, thinking all along, what a moment, what a special moment to capture this complete vision of beauty, and no one else to witness this but us. Tom," says Rob, "is truly one of the very few friends that would actually do this. He always was so appreciative of the natural beauty of nature, the flowers, the lakes around him. He always recognized the joy that it gave him and took the time to enjoy those things with others. 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year in the life? How about love, indeed? And there's yet more to say. Tom was a Unitarian and a great one, and I had actually not heard Kip's stories about sermons before, so that just adds to it. This guy would be writing down stuff, notes, thoughts, want to talk about the sermons, engage the sermons. That's fantastic right there. But there's also this story I heard. It comes from Thomas Person. Thomas Person says, I have one explicit memory as a teenager from the first Unitarian church in Toledo, Ohio. A bunch of us kids were having a discussion with Mr. Bollin, and I'll never forget what he said. Have an opinion, stand by it, but be able to articulate it and be able to pivot like yourselves. Your opinions are going to grow, change, evolve. When you look back at it many years from now, you might even disagree with what you said today. And Thomas Person says, Mr. Bollin was right. That's a great Unitarian Universalist right there. This Unitarian Universalist minister approves. Tom Bollin, you were right. You are right. Thank you for being a Unitarian Universalist religious educator in addition to all the roles you filled as an educator elsewhere. Tom, we are remembering you this day with love, your passion, your compassion, your courage, your joy, your kindness, your appreciation of beauty, your wisdom. We measure your life, we celebrate your life with love. And we also come here to create shared space, to do together what is so hard to do separately and alone. We are celebrating, but we are also grieving, and we are saying goodbye. Gather the stars, says poet Carl Sandburg. Gather the songs and keep them. Gather for keeping years and years, and then loosen hands. Let go and say goodbye. Let the stars and the songs go. Let the faces and the years go. Loosen hands and say goodbye. But it is not the sort of goodbye in which Tom disappears utterly from heart and mind. Not at all. Our celebration of life is above all an acknowledgement of the sacred mystery of how any life ultimately defeats nothingness. And as Unitarian Universalists, we are free to tell different stories about this. Some Unitarian Universalists will speak of reincarnation. Others will speak of there being no afterlife at all. Still others will say a different thing yet. But the one story that we can all share in the telling of is how the actions of people who have long since died, they still reverberate. In the same way that light from a star that has long since collapsed continues to stream through space and time, continues to shine, continues to warm. To paraphrase Peter Rabel, the Reverend Peter Rabel, foundations have been laid, which we did not build. Fires have been lit, which we did not light. Trees have been planted, which we did not plant. Wells have been dug, which we did not dig. Any person who has lost a loved one knows that this is true, that death does not end a relationship so much as inaugurate a new beginning for it, a new way of growing through it, a new way of appreciating it. Death is not an end, but a doorway. And it is a certain kind of doorway to the living as well. To each of you here, side by side, with the laughter and the tears which arise as you remember Tom and think on his life and his death, side by side, is the equal task of you yourself going back out into that world and leaning into the one wild, precious life that you have been given, which by the grace of God is still present tense, is still yours. May you live it as well as Tom did, with passion, compassion, courage, joy, kindness, appreciation of beauty, wisdom, so many more things. May you live and live and live until that final moment when death comes for you. And as for Tom, I'll be thinking about that story involving sweet 6-year-old Emily Menson on her birthday, going to visit Tom at work. And Tom was a superintendent. He was a very busy man then. He was an important man, perhaps too busy and important to waste time with a little girl. But Tom takes the time. He gives her a set of Pocahontas pencils, which also becomes a gift of memory that Emily Menson has never forgotten. Decades and decades later, so many people have been given gifts of unforgettable memories because of Tom. Look at his face. Look at that twinkle. How do you measure a year in the life or a life as a whole? You measure it in love. Seasons of love. Seasons of love. Rest in peace and in power, Tom Bollin. Let's now sing our hymn together. Please stand as you are willing and able. Every day is the best day in the year. He is rich who owns the day, and no one owns the day who allows it to be invaded with fret and anxiety. If you cannot finish every day and be done with it, you have done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. Begin it well and serenely, with too high a spirit to be cumbered with your old nonsense. Love will guide us. This new day is too dear with its hopes and its invitations to waste a moment on the yesterdays. Let us now enter into a time of silent meditation, prefaced by these profound words from Dorothy Monroe. Death is not too high a price to pay for having lived. Mountains never die, nor do the seas or rocks or endless sky. Through thousands of centuries of time, they stay eternal, deathless, yet they never live. If choice were there, I would not hesitate to choose mortality. Whatever fate demanded in return for life, I'd give. For never having seen the fertile plains, nor heard the winds, nor felt the warm sun on sands beneath a salty sea, nor touching the hands of one I love, without these, all the gains of timelessness would not be worth one day of living and loving, come what may. So may it be. Amen. Seasons of love in the wake of death are unsteady. One moment, you're laughing at the gadgets, the Costco shenanigans, the silly hats. One moment, you're just laughing, and then the next moment, you are bawling. And not always just for the person who's died. Every death makes you remember about the other deaths and losses in your life. Seasons of love after a death are unsteady. So in these upcoming days and weeks and months, as you grieve Tom's death, please strengthen and encourage each other. Let there be an extra dose of patience and compassion in this time. Let it be a time of continuing to remember and to share feelings and stories about Tom. While he has died, he still lives on in all of you here, all of his family and friends, and the many lives he touched. The love we have for him will never end, and for us, we are set upon a journey of grief and loss and love, and it is a mystery, and it is hard work. Please be patient and loving to yourself and to each other in this time. The chalice will now be extinguished. The chalice is now extinguished, but its light, which represents Tom's wonderful life, is now ours to take forth from this place and to share it with the people we know, people we love, and perhaps even people we have yet to meet. We now conclude this celebration of life. Please rise in body and in spirit. Humbly we stand in the face of death. Confidently we stand with life, because we share one fate and a great compassion. Our strength is the strength of all humanity throughout all time. Let us now go in acceptance and in thanksgiving, grateful for the life of Tom Bollin, comforted by one another's presence, and sustained by the peace of all that is sacred. So may it be. Amen.